The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are our own, or those of our guests, and in no way represent the views of the companies, associations, or organizations that any of us may work for or represent. All stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they were told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident. You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast that explores the many pathways to an aviation profession, the challenges that a professional aviator can expect in today's marketplace, and we share many stories along the way. I'm your host, Aviator Tony, an airline pilot currently flying for a U.S. Legacy Airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. Welcome aboard Flight 88 of the Squawk Ident podcast, recorded on the 31st of August, 2021, from the Aviator Sound Studios from somewhere in Southern California. On today's flight, we are proud to be joined by a fantastic Squawk Ident crew member. Rob D is here. Our journey today will have us speaking with an amazing aviator. He is a Texas sheep rancher, a glider instructor, CFI II, MEI flight instructor, and he has type ratings in the Citation jet, the MD-80, the 737, 777, 787, and the DC-3. He is a Legacy Airline Captain and a Flagship Detroit DC-3 Captain. We are honored to have Captain Vic Barber join us today. All this and more aboard Flight 88 of the Squawk Ident podcast. Now that our pre-flight is complete, let's get ready to push off the gate and start those virtual podcast engines. Flight 88 is officially underway. Assisting at the controls today is a superb aviator and Squawk Ident co-host. He is a former international and professional racquetball champion, a member of the 9G Club, an AP and avionics tech, an RC aircraft commander, a boat skipper, a commercial drone operator, and currently an Airbus pilot for Legacy Airlines. The name we use here on the show is an alias to our employer, a U.S. mainline carrier. He joins us today from his layover in Seattle, Washington, where the smoked salmon and the lobster rolls are in his near future. Help us in welcoming our very own Mr. Rob D. Rob, how the hell are you?
Hey, Tony. Good to be back, man. I can't wait to go get some smoked salmon chowder and a lobster roll. It's like the best out here.
You know, I really enjoy the Seattle layovers, especially the long ones downtown. Yeah. I mean, totally worth it. Absolutely.
It is.
So what have you been up to?
I saw this. Well, I've been getting to know the Airbus recently, stretching the legs on some of the flights out of Dallas, but I went to Vancouver last week, and that was a great layover. The weather was perfect. We're right downtown. Again, there's plenty of seafood to be had, and I guess the border just opened up, and it was really, really cool to see, the downtown starting to come back to life. And when we had lunch or brunch at this beautiful restaurant down by the river, the server was actually telling us that it was the first time that she's seen a U.S. dollar in a while because the border's been closed. So it was pretty cool.
So they're accepting cash.
They're accepting cash, U.S. cash.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you're stretching your legs out there on the bus. Anything like kind of bite you yet? Because that's normally what they say is within the first 300 hours, that you think you're comfortable and you're all calm, cool, and collective. And all of a sudden Fifi says, no, you didn't. And she just comes up and bites you.
No, nothing yet. I think it's coming. I'm sure it's going to happen to me sometime. But, as you probably know, you fly a few of these airliners around for a while, and you learn you have to be totally ahead of the airplane as much as you can. So I've been trying to do a very good job of that, getting down early and slowing down and just not getting behind the airplane at any point. And as you know, the Airbus is a easy airplane to fly. So it's really laid back and, not too big of a, there's not very much, at least from what I've seen, that can get you in trouble unless you're really far behind the airplane. So everything's good.
Yeah. And
I'm sure that day's coming though.
Yeah. I think I've pretty much made most of the mistakes possible to in the airplane and not damage it.
Well, I've been learning from guys like you and everybody else out there. I try to learn from other people's mistakes and try not to makes them when I operate the airplane.
Yeah,
but
just
it's gonna
remember,
happen, I'm sure.
Remember, if you're going into Phoenix and they say, "Hey, do you want runway 26 the last second?" and you find yourself on base leg, autopilot off, flight directors off.
Flight directors off. Give me the bird.
don't slow the aircraft down that much. Sorry, folks.
Right on. Yeah.
No, but we're really excited today because Rob sent me a text message a few days ago and says, "Hey, I got this fantastic captain that would be just wonderful for the show. Let's get him on." And as I start digging into our next guest, I was really impressed with everything that he's accomplished. And talk about when you have someone that you can fly with and you find out about their background and they become really a symbol of leadership and mentorship in the program in the airline industry. And our next guest definitely falls suit to that. He, as we mentioned in the opener, he is a Texas sheep rancher. Now, we're going to have to find out about this. A glider instructor, which is amazing. Anything without an engine kind of scares me a little bit. Yes, hot air balloons are included in that. I don't. But yeah, CFI, II, and MEI flight instructor, still currently flight instructing. He has type ratings in a plethora of aircraft, almost every Boeing airplane that Legacy Airline flies. And what's most intriguing, he has a type rating in the DC-3. Currently flies the DC-3 around. And that is some amazing. I mean, anybody that's watched Casablanca will sit there and see the final scene and the airplane and the fog and the DC-3. I think it's a DC-3 with the engines spooling up and getting ready to go, and the fog and just the sound
big radial
of
engine.
that big radial engine and it's that sound to me is like butter. I mean, come on. And our next guest gets to fly a DC-3 on a regular basis. He's a Legacy Airline Captain, a Flagship Detroit DC Captain. We're honored to have you. Let's just say a big Squawk Ident welcome to Captain Vic Barber. Captain, how the heck are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on board today.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Vic. Welcome aboard.
We're going to talk about your journey here in just a moment. But let's talk about, just for a split moment, what you've been experiencing just recently out on the line with all that's going on in the world and in the industry. You have the mask mandate, you have this vaccine debate that's going on. You got Delta now mandating that their pilots get it. Have you ever seen this in your long career in aviation?
Well, nothing like this, of course, but we do have an interesting last 20 years in the airline industry. So what I've learned in this industry is that it's important to manage your expectations. When 9/11 happened, security went crazy. We were all we were used to going around security, or at least being very hassled at a minimum, and that all changed. And it was very frustrating. It was easy to walk around and be angry all the time. And one day I just decided I'm tired of being angry all the time. And why am I angry all the time? Well, it's because my expectations aren't properly managed. So when I come to KCM today, KCM is a wonderful thing. Now we can go around the regular security lines. But occasionally we get a random check. So when I come to the KCM, this is the time that I'm going to get. I just prepare myself to get a random. If it happens, I go around. It's no big deal. It's when things catch you by surprise that you're going to get upset about it. And so you have to have a realistic expectation about what's going to happen with your day. And so learned a lot of that through the last big event we had. And we get here, and I caught myself doing it again. The masks and this and that. And I got to tell you, I am so tired of hearing no, you can't do that, or no this, or we can't do that, COVID. And this country just wasn't built on that. It was built on not no or what we can't do. It was built on how do we do what we want to do? How do we do it? How do we make it happen? And no is frustrating. So catch myself being frustrated, and so I just kind of realized that I'm not in control of any of that, and just need to manage my expectations. And if I get a random check in KCM, then whatever. And if I don't, it's a bonus. Now I'm happy.
Yeah. That's very well said. I think we've been talking about that now for some time, is being prepared, having your expectations. I mean, isn't that what we do as pilots? We're always prepared for that engine failure at V1, the most critical point at rotation.
Exactly.
You got to be prepared for that. Now, if it happens, you don't get bent around the axle. You just go, well, I've been trained for this. Time to get that muscle memory and those memorized flows and call outs out there.
My aircraft.
My aircraft.
Those are the two hardest words to get out of your mouth anytime something happens.
Yep. And Denzel did it so eloquently in the movie Flight, the fictitious film, that does not happen in real life, ladies and gentlemen. You cannot roll and go inverted in an airliner for an extended period of time. But I have control, my aircraft. Yeah, okay, sure, Denzel, you go for it. But to get back onto your journey, we were talking a little bit in the pre-show, and you said that your start didn't happen at a very young age with an expectation, partly because of your environment and what you were being told by the people around you, the older people around you. What can you tell me about how you got your start in aviation?
Okay, well, every kid likes airplanes. And I remember going to the airport a couple times with Mom and, waving at the airplanes and thinking that's pretty neat. When I was about 15, I started working on a wheat farm. I grew up in Idaho, and I was working on a wheat farm. It was a big deal, driving huge tractors, combines, trucks, all aspects of the wheat production process. And the spray planes would come out and spray the fields. And those guys were they were just hot. Sierra Hotel. That was just, and the boss's son and I would go, we'd climb up on the grain bins have a distributor auger that the augers go up above the grain elevators, and you select which bin you want the grain to go into. Well, there's distributor up there, and there's ladders to go up there. So we get up on top and watch the spray planes do the field. Now, that was always a big turn on, but no real good influence. Nobody telling me you can go do that. It's just the opposite. Well, you have to do. You have to have perfect eyes, or you have to have this or that, which I did, by the way, perfect eyes. But be a genius and straight A's and all that sort of stuff. So there wasn't a lot of encouragement there until later in my toward the end of my senior year in high school. I had moved a couple times, and the next door neighbor, a good friend of mine to this day, her dad was the manager of the Kansas City Downtown Airport. He was a retired Air Force B-52 captain, and he was just the opposite. He encouraged me. He told me you can do whatever you want to do, and he showed me a whole path. Well, there's that saying, the straight and narrow path he showed me turned into 1,000 winding roads. It started out in the right direction and ended up at a great destination, but it was a big winding journey. Did I answer your question, or did I just go off on something?
No, that's exactly, what impressed me so much about when we were chatting a little bit before the beginning of the show is that, you always ask, how'd you get in your start in aviation? And everyone has a unique journey. That was part of the reason I wanted to start this podcast so many years ago, a couple of years ago now that we've been on the air, is because I'm always so intrigued by everyone's unique journey. And it's very similar what you were being told at a young age, that from what I was even being told at a young age. It's like, oh, we're not rich. Only rich people become pilots, and you have to be really good in math, and you're not good in math, so you can't be a pilot. And basically,
you have to be in the military.
You have to be in the military. You have to know
military.
You have to know a congressman in order to
go
get
to college,
the endorsement. All this stuff, and I later in life realized that my family thought it was dangerous, so they were discouraging me. And so, typical Italian, no, it's a danger, and so that's what I heard from my parents, and it wasn't until later on in life that I met my wife, and she says, that's bull crap. Don't listen to other people tell you no. You want to listen to the people that tell you, yes, you can. And that's exactly what you did. And thank you for sharing that with us, because I'm absolutely positive that there are those out there in the community, and maybe even some listeners listening to this show, that are hearing the same from their surrounding. And you can't listen to that noise. Surround yourself with the people that say, yes, you can. And if they don't know, you don't have a mentor, you don't have a leader in your life that can say, this is how you're going to do it, here's the pathway, then find it. Go hang out at that local GA airport and find that old timer that's sitting there telling old stories, and the connections will begin. The journey will begin. And so thank you for sharing that with us. Now, Vic, you finally found someone, your neighbor's father, who was managing the Kansas City airport, finally showed you the pathway. Where did that path begin for you?
Well, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with myself, school, and where was I going to go? What was I going to do? And he suggested the Warrant Officer Flight Training Program in the Army. So, hey, I can go straight in. And so we went down and talked to a recruiter. I did the, I don't know how they test now, but it was the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery then. And I scored very well on that. And then we did the Flight Aptitude Service Test, scored very well on that. And that started things going. After I graduated from high school, I went on a wheat harvest crew. And that starts down. They used to do it this way, and I don't think they still do. Farmers tend to have their own harvesting equipment now. But there would be these operators that had several combines and trucks, and they would start down in Texas when the wheat started to ripen, and they would follow the harvest up through the Midwest, because it would be earlier in Texas, and then everything would start to ripen through Kansas or through Kansas and Colorado and Montana. Would end the season into Montana. And so I went on one of those crews and stayed on that crew up into Kansas. And then I went back home to Idaho when it came time to harvest up there, back to the ranch where I worked. And this whole time we were processing. We were running the processing for warrant officer flight in the Army. Well, so after the harvest, my processing was still completing, and I got a request from the flight surgeon at Fort Rucker. My application had got to him, and he was reviewing, and I had gotten clobbered in the eye when I was a sophomore in high school. And I had what's called a blowout fracture. There's a paper-thin bone that holds up the orbit of your eye. So to heal that, they put a silicone implant disc underneath there, and your bone heals and press on. Well, that had happened. And so the flight surgeon wanted me to go up to Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane and have an Air Force doctor look at it. He looked at it, he said, "You're fine." At the time, I had 20/10 vision, so everything worked great. No problem. So they sent the application back, and harvest was over. We did fall cultivation. I did a few odd jobs, and my application came back again. They wanted me to go to a civilian doctor up in Spokane and get my eye looked at again. So I went to the civilian doctor. The civilian doctor, he was a little perturbed. He thought they were wasting his time. But he looked at it and said, "You're fine." Sent the application back. So by this time, I was out of work. It was wintertime. Nothing was happening up there. So I had a job waiting for me in Atlanta, Georgia. So I went to Atlanta. I drove my Mustang. I had a 65 Mustang. I drove to Atlanta, and I was working 2 jobs down there waiting for this process to happen. And eventually, what I was planning on doing, I was just waiting. I was waiting. And the flight surgeon finally rejected my application. Now, this was the early 80s, and there were military cutbacks. 10 years later, I probably could have not even had that eye and got in. But they were looking for ways to cut people out of the process. So the flight surgeon, he washed my application for previous damage, since I'd had previous damage on the eye. And I was crushed. I had this future looking. I was going to go fly helicopters or fixed wing in the Army and take it from there, have a career. So I didn't know what I was going to do at that point. I need to figure out something. So I went back to the recruiter and said, "What else you got?" And he says, "Well, how about air traffic control?" I said, "Okay, that keeps me in the industry, and I can get college benefits, GI Bill, whatnot." And so let's do it. So we signed up for delayed entry. I was going to go back to Idaho and work the harvest, and because the whole year had gone through, it was getting close to harvest time again. And so I was on my way. I'd sold my car and bought a motorcycle, and I was on my way to the motorcycle shop to get a fairing for my trip. I was going to ride it back up to Idaho. And a guy pulled out in front of me, and I crashed into him and destroyed my right foot. Almost lost it. 9 pins and 2 screws to put it back together. Bazillion stitches. 8 hours of surgery, just debreeding the foot from all the stuff in it. So that took me out for a year, and it made me ineligible for the military. So now what am I going to do? I spent the year recovering, and the lawsuit, I got some money out of that. And so I headed to Embry-Riddle and got my private there. And I was there for 2 years, and I ended up with getting tight on funds. So I dropped out of school, which I regret to this day. So if anybody's listening, don't use me as an example. It would have been a whole different picture if I had come out of there with a degree. But I wanted to put all the money towards flying. So I got my instrument license and my commercial license. I went down to Phoenix at Estrella Sailport and got my glider rating. And then I ended up getting a job, my first flying job in Idaho, towing gliders and giving glider rides up in Driggs, Idaho, just on the west side of the Tetons from Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Wonderful summer. At the end of the year, I was, the work ended. I did a little bit of work for one of my boss's friends. We were oiling and chinking log houses. That to get by. And I actually worked for a crop duster for a little while, loading chemical for him. He told me that if I loaded for him in the fall, he'd let me fly the mosquito contracts down in Salt Lake Basin in his Pawnee, or his Brave in the fall, or in the spring rather. So I kind of thought, okay, here's someplace I can go. Be one of those guys that was my hero and back when I was a kid. Well, I did that for a few weeks and hated smelling like chemical, constantly stained skin. And we had an incident where I was loading his ag wagon or ag cat out on a dirt road. He was landing on the roads between the fields. We were spraying for potato bugs, and the hose broke and it drenched me. So I had to strip all my clothes off, and we ran to a golf course to hose me down. And at that point I thought, I don't think this is for me. I love the airplanes and I respect those guys, but I don't want that chemical in me. That's pretty harsh stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't like not being able to wash it off, the smell off. And again, a lot of respect for those guys. So I ended up back in northern Idaho for a short while, and then I headed to Southern California. I have an aunt and uncle down there, and I was going to go down there and look for work. So I found a job in Hemet, California, towing gliders on the weekends. They only needed somebody on the weekends. They were a full-time operation, but they were staffed. So I got to tow gliders on the weekend, and I worked another job. I was working in a radiator shop, spraying radiators and delivering radiators, and then I ended up working at a Paris, California, at a jump operation, doing a little bit of hauling jumpers, and eventually went full time at the glider field. So I was doing 20 to 30 tows a day, towing gliders 6 days a week, making $40 a day.
Wow.
Still looking for the step up, and still going back and forth down to San Diego. And I found a job. Well, I actually instructed in Palm Springs for a little bit. Little gig as a flight instructor. I had my CFI. I picked that up and did that for a little bit, and then ended up getting a job with a charter operation down in San Diego, Brown Field. They were doing charters for the military, the Navy squadrons, hauling parts for the squadrons on detachment. So that was really interesting. I got to do a lot of neat things, flying in and out of military bases. Got to land once on the lake bed at Edwards, which was
wow.
That's cool.
I couldn't wipe that grin off my face for a month. We were flying 402s, 401s, 206s. We were flying for the Navy and the Marines mostly out of North Island, Miramar. Anyways, we were flying for the Blue Angels over at El Centro when they were training. Big adventure.
Yeah.
I was making a little bit more money, but not very well. Actually, I wasn't making as much money, but I was definitely having a great time. Well, so I had been putting applications out everywhere, and I got a call back from a little commuter in Nebraska called GP Express Airlines, and they were flying 402s, and I had time in the 402. Well, they had a scheduled side and they had an unscheduled side. On the scheduled side, you had to use two pilots. On the unscheduled side, you could just one pilot. On the scheduled side, you had to have an ATP to be captain. And on the unscheduled side, you didn't. You just had to meet the 135 quals. And I had time in the airplane and the qual, so they hired me for their unscheduled side. When I was flying a freight run out of Omaha, Nebraska to Grand Island, Nebraska every morning. It was a FedEx contract that they had in the 402. Eventually, FedEx brought a caravan in for that, and so I was out of work on that side. So they put me on the airline side, and I didn't have enough seniority to be a captain. I didn't have my ATP yet, so I flew as a co-pilot, which was one of those things. There's a lot of things that helped me be here today, and getting to go from a single pilot environment completely and getting on the airline side and starting to learn from some more experienced captains was a real blessing. Then I ended up
how old are you at this point?
Oh, I'm 23, maybe 20.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of experience and a lot of changing in your life, really, at a relatively young age, to go from graduating high school and just kind of getting your private pilot right after to now having all this experience and all this change where you, like, every 3 or 4 months kind of looking for that next opportunity.
Oh yeah. I joke around and say I couldn't hold a steady job, but the fact of the matter is that I was kind of moving up, in most cases moving up or getting some better experience, because I got nearly 1,000 hours of towing, and it was 20 to 30 tows a day, 4 to 6 hours of flying every day, towing gliders, and I can land the crap out of a Pawnee. But it was daytime single engine land, and it didn't look that great for a resume.
Right.
Yeah. So the FedEx operator, or the feeder freight operator, is a better word, because FedEx wasn't their only only contract. They did the UPS stuff, and they hired me to do an airborne express run. And the company was called Corporate Air, based out of Billings, Montana. They hired me for a run that they had in a Navajo chieftain, going from Denver to Rifle and spending all day in Rifle and coming back. And I would end up come back Saturday morning. I would come back. I wouldn't stay there all day. So, and then Monday evening I'd fly back out. And so I cut my teeth flying over the mountains there, and that was a good experience. And eventually that run ended, and so they brought me over to Denver and checked me out in the 500 and 680 Commander and the Caravan, and I ended up flying that whole system. We flew through Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, to Utah, and and that was the first time I really had a good positive cash flow. I wasn't rich by any means, but all the bills were getting paid every month, and life was good.
As a pilot, that's a huge accomplishment, especially starting out.
Definitely.
So I flew there, and I got on at that company. We could make a note about this. Most of my jobs have been not based on my resume, because it hasn't always looked that good. Most of my chances to get a foot in the door came because I had a good work record. Guys knew me. I had a reputation, good work ethic, and I didn't tear up equipment and break rules. So my first flying job was actually one of my tailwheel instructor recommended me for that job up in Idaho. And the job at Corporate Air over in Denver, my first boss recommended me for the job there, because he was actually flying caravans for them in Hawaii. They had the Hawaii caravans. The next job, I got a call from a fellow named Jim Cromie. He was the training officer at GP Express, and he had left there to go work at a startup flying Cessna Citations in scheduled service, and that was in Cincinnati. So he hired me to go over there, and I spent a year. I got 1,000 hours in the Citation, a type rating. I was one of the last captains to upgrade there. And what happened was Saddam invaded Kuwait. So when the fuel prices spiked up, and the company went bankrupt. So not having burned any bridges, I went back to my last job at Corporate Air and flew there for a while, but I was back at the bottom of the seniority again. So I was there for a little less than a year and got furloughed. So they all say you got to have furlough under your belt to be an airline pilot. So that was my furlough. And they actually were using me every now and again, because FedEx was trading in old caravans for new ones. And so I was taking the old caravans over to Wichita and taking delivery of the new caravans for the company. So that got me a little bit extra money. And I was talking to the salesman, or the guy that was handling the contract over at Wichita at Cessna, and he hooked me up with Jim Coey. Jim Coey was the chief pilot at West Air Industries, which is another caravan operator in California. So so I called him, and he said, "Yeah, we got peak season Christmas coming up. You come on out and fly with us for peak season, and then after the season, the holiday season, we'll see what we have, and if you're interested." So I went out there, and again, the beginning of a lifelong friendship with Jim. I actually stayed with him in Fresno during the peak season, and at the end of this season, he had the Reno run open, Reno to Oakland every night. So I took that run, and I was flying Reno to Oakland every night, and I was going to school. I really do like school. I dropped out of Embry-Riddle, and I realized, after being out in the world, every check ride is do or die. Every ground school is do or die. When your job counts, depends on it, you become really good at studying. And at that point so I was taking classes in Reno. That's where I met my wife. She was a study partner, and another blessing, the added stability to my life.
Someone that's going to support your hobby for sure.
Yeah.
Of flying.
Yeah, she was the I don't want to say anchor. I want to say stabilize my life. So, anyways, turns out that West Air Industries, FedEx, was bringing an F-27 into Reno because we had four Caravans running out of Reno at night. So they decided that an F-27 would be a better airplane for it. And West Air Industries didn't fly the F-27 for FedEx. It was operated by an outfit up in Idaho, Empire Airways. They were operating F-27s for FedEx. And so they came down. I didn't want to go back to the valley and fly Caravans as a floater. It wasn't going to be a run. It was just going to be floating around down there. And I wanted something a little more stable. So there was a job opening at Mountain Air Cargo, which was another FedEx F-27 operator. And so I went to work there, and I was based in Memphis, flying the F-27 for almost about a year and 8 months or something like that. Yeah. In the meantime, the first DC-9 MD-80 at we're going to call it Mustang Air was delivered while I was still at Reno, and I just wanted to go work for that company so bad, and so I worked on that for the next time I was in Memphis, and eventually got an interview and got hired there. Came back to Reno, and then and was there. It flew in I was in the training department there. Really, the upgrades were happening so fast that I became a part of the training process just so I could be ready for my upgrade. And so upgraded to captain, then ended up becoming a sim instructor a little bit later, and then we were acquired by Legacy Airlines.
Yeah. Now, Mustang Airlines is as what we're going to call it. Was that your first 121 job?
Well, actually, we were 121 in the F-27.
Because you were doing the scheduled.
Yeah.
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 So, but this is your first, like, airline. Real airline.
Yeah.
Now,
bigger airline.
Now, you said you everything you were focused on at that point was to get a job at Mustang Air. You were located there with your other job. You had ample opportunity to kind of get your resume and applications and interview prep done. Do you remember that process well? Was that something? I know things have changed over the years. Now it's all about online forms and algorithms and questionnaires, and it's not really who you know anymore because nobody really walks in a resume anymore. But back, a few years ago, that's really how it was. And you have, given us a fantastic example of how a typical pilot in the private sector would have to build time. They wouldn't even look at your application. I got 1,500 hours and an ATP. Let's go. No, you had to have all this experience and this traveling across the country and getting different jobs, doing different things. And it sounds like, it's been a fantastic opportunity for us to hear all of the different experience and the networking that you've done and the friendships that you've acquired. We've been saying it since day one. You don't burn your bridges in this industry because it may seem larger than life, but it is a very small community when you look at the reality of it. You built that time, and here you were now with plenty of experience under multiple aspects. How did you line yourself up to get that job?
It's funny you should say that, because it just so happens that my girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, her dad was a property manager, commercial properties manager, and he managed the property that was the headquarters for Mustang Air. And so I used to go to coffee in the morning with him and all of his cronies. They were a really interesting bunch of guys. They were now all had something to do with aviation, with the either flying corporate for the casinos there, or former instructors there, or just they all were pilots from one degree or another, and they all got together for coffee every morning, and it was a great place to go and get my current events and local history lesson from the old timers, and we'd go to coffee, and he kept telling me, I think I can get your resume into, I forget his name, but he was the head of human resources there at Mustang Air. And I didn't believe him. God, I had put out, it had to be easily 1,000 resumes and applications. I had sent them out to every commuter, you name it. And there was a bunch of them back then. And I know I'd send applications and resumes to every operator in the country. And it just doesn't work that way, and you got to have so-and-so. I was channeling all those people that told me what I couldn't do when I was young. And so I went to Mountaineer Cargo, and I came back on a 3-day weekend I had to see Leslie, and he said, "Hey," and again I forget his name, but the director of human resources. He said he'll meet us for coffee. Really? He said, "Yeah, bring a resume." Okay. So we met and had a nice visit. And he said, he looked at my resume and said, "Yeah, you meet all the qualifications. You had to have 5,000 hours total time. You had to have 1,000 hours of jet."
Wow.
At the time. And I just met that 1,000 hours of jet with my citation time to get an interview.
Wow.
And because what happened at Mustang Air, they were part of another. The initial cadre there were DC-9 pilots from a previous airline that had gone bankrupt, and so they had a lot of guys with type ratings. So initially you had to have a DC-9 type rating, and then they ran out of those guys. So they said you had to have 1,000 hours of jet, 5,000 hour total time. And then when it started getting hard to find, they went to 1,000 hours of PIC 121 time, which started dipping into the commuters that were had the 121 aircraft. So she said, "Yeah, I think we can get you an interview."
Interesting.
Oh.
Well, yeah, sure.
So I showed up and I took their written test, which was kind of like an ATP written, and had an interview with the director of operations and the chief pilot and the director of training, and they hired me.
Wow,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
How it was like a whirlwind. It's like, how did I get here?
Hanging out, having coffee turned into a 121 job.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Should have just done this 5 years ago. No.
At that point, I really realized, oh, this is how the world works. Yeah. And so, it was kind of a deal where, it sure helps who you know. And it's what you know that keeps you there though. But, you need to establish contacts and maintain those contacts throughout your life. It's a world of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true.
And that's something that I try to bestow upon my daughter and like all the young people in my life, my nieces and nephews, is be kind. We live in a world and in a time where social media and technology, it allows us to have this veil of fake security that we can just say anything we want. We can be sarcastic and I was one of those younger people that was sarcastic and thought I was being funny and lighthearted because I wanted to make somebody laugh, and not realizing that sarcasm, though it might be fun with a buddy, you kick them when they're down kind of thing, but when it comes to your professional goals and environment, man, you really got to be kind and learn how to talk to people, and more importantly, learn how to listen to people. And it sounds like a lot of the experiences that you're telling us about lended the opportunity to have to intermingle with a lot of different people, of a lot of different personality types within the industry, and still maintain that reputation that you mentioned that you had as being not just a rule follower, but someone that could be dependable and reliable and fly the airplane the way it's supposed to be and not hot dog it. And in the end, that reputation lended an opportunity to get the employment for your dream job, the job that when you were a kid, you were surrounded by people that were not helping you see that you could do. And here you were years later doing it. And you got the job at Mustang Air. I've flown with many people. I have what now I can say are my friends, coworkers that I've flown with, that I've had a wonderful rapport with over the years. We've had a few on our show that have flown for Mustang Air.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Hans has been on the show. Yes, sir. He's a good friend. I still chat with him on a weekly basis, at least with the help of social media. It's one of the good things about that. And a few others. And we've, always love hearing about how laid back that employment time was for them, because Mustang Air seems to have had that small airline experience at a time in the late 90s when people were more laid back. They had more fun and weren't worried about someone, going, "I'm offended. I'm going to write you up. You're not wearing your mask properly. I'm going to write you up.
Geez.
Don't pull your mask down in front of me. I'm going to write you up."
Well, I have to say, I'm a little bit disappointed because I thought I was your first here on the show.
Well, don't feel bad. We invite only the best and the best company.
That's right.
So the merger happened. And we're not talking about the big merger, the Moab, all that stuff. We're talking about when Mustang Air was acquired by Legacy Airlines back in, I think it was 1999?
Yeah. And that was I like to think that was the test run for all the other ones.
Yeah. And there was some difficulties to be had back then. That was more, I don't want to say vintage Legacy management, but it was the older generation of management over at Legacy Airlines that was going through that. And this is, of course, at a time when there was a lot of growth in the industry still, and times were different. Now, when you came over to Legacy, what equipment did you end up getting on?
I stayed on the MD-80.
Okay. And that transition was a couple years after you got to American, before you saw something else?
I need to think about it. It was quite a while, actually. I was about quality of life, and I liked being where I was. I was familiar with the airplane, and at least for a little while, I didn't want to change anything that I didn't have to, because a lot of things were changing. And I came out here. Texas was a big change for us. Texas can be a hard place to live. We have a love-hate relationship with Texas. It can be a hard place to live, but this is my 41st address in my life, physical address. I counted them one day.
Oh my!
Wait, what?
Yeah, my parents were divorced when I was young, and so a couple of address changes, going back and living with Dad a little bit, and my grandparents were they were construction. My grandfather was a construction laborer, so he went from hydroelectric dam projects back and forth, and so we saw some movement, and then of course the career. So this is my 41st physical address. Now, that being said, I've lived here for over 20 years now, and like I said, Texas hands out its challenges, but in the places that I've lived that have been the hardest to live, almost without exception, the people have made up the difference. And I love my Texans. My neighbors are the finest people I've ever known, and I'm blessed to have them. My neighbors here, my church family. I don't have to worry when I go on a trip. My wife and family are taken care of. So, yeah,
there's a lot to be said with that, especially in this day and age.
Definitely,
yeah. But we bought the ranch, and it was a lot of work. There was a lot of change. I actually, one of my oldest, dearest friends here, is he's kind of a counselor, and I was having some difficulties when we first came here, and what he summed it up is, losses can come in many forms. The worst being loss of a child, a divorce being like second worst, and there are other losses, but the effects can be cumulative. And I had lost my home in Nevada. I had lost all my friends in Nevada. And I hadn't really lost them, but they were gone. I wasn't seeing them anymore. And I'd come to my base here in Dallas and go out and fly with a captain that I'd never met before. And at the end of 4 days, I had a new friend. But at the end of that trip, I'm walking away and I may never fly with that guy again. So I just had another loss. And yeah. So those things can be cumulative. So I didn't want to change anything that I didn't have to, because I was having a hard enough go of it as it was. I mean, the reason I bought this ranch is because my hobby was training border collies to herd cows. That was my hobby back then. And I bought this ranch so I could have a few sheep to train pups with and keep that going, compete a little bit. And my number one dog got run over. And that was a huge loss. I couldn't even talk about it for over a year.
Yeah.
And so, all of those things. So I didn't want to change anything. So I stayed on the 80 for quite a while until the 7.3, and then went to the 7.3 and flew it for 7 years, and really enjoyed it. I love the 7.3.
Was that on the right seat?
Yes.
Yeah.
We were stapled at the bottom of the seniority, and then 9/11 happened. The last 10 years, 65. It was 18 years before I got back in the left seat.
Wow. Yeah.
Jeez.
And they call it the lost decade after 9/11 for a reason. I mean, we talk about what we've been going through now with this current pandemic and crisis in the industry, but really we've seen an effect that it happened at a time when there was a national, if not global, pilot shortage. I remember over a year ago, we were talking about the Boeing stats on the national pilot shortage and how we just didn't have the numbers of people getting their private and commercial ratings anymore. So there was a lack of interest. I think people saw the struggle and the stagnation and the lack of compensation for a career that's extremely expensive to get all your ratings and everything, get started in your education and all that. So yeah, that lost decade that was felt after 9/11, and some could argue even it started even a little bit before that. It really did put a hamper in a lot of people's quality of life. And it sounds like, after that merger and the move to Texas and the buying of the ranch and the loss that you felt, and it's a wonderful way of explaining it. Thank you so much. I've never actually heard somebody think of it like that or explain it that way, that everything, and you fly with a great captain. I do that all the time. And then it's like, I know I may not ever fly with them again. Yeah. Thank goodness we have a podcast to try to get them to come on and talk to me about their life and stuff. But, it is an accumulative loss, and sometimes you feel kind of down on it a little bit, and you think it's just you're tired, but I think there's a lot to be said about the feeling of knowing that you may not never see this person that you had such a great time, in the flight deck, flying along, doing what you love, and you hope to see you again sometime. That's a pretty it hits.
Yeah, and those guys, all of those guys, we talk about it. We're doing it right now. The stories that you get from everybody, and fantastic stories, and it kind of feels like you're a part of their life now when you hear all those stories, boy, some of those. I remember the Vietnam guys. Some of those guys had the most phenomenal stories. You'd go on for days about that. So. And then you're gone. And those guys, what I wish I had done early in my career was sat down and wrote down those stories. I'd have a phenomenal book right now.
I bet.
Yeah, for sure.
And at the very least, I'd remember the names of the specific individuals, and I could, he was down in San Antonio. I wonder if he's, and maybe just try to look him up sometime and say, hey, how you're doing these days.
Yeah.
And we're going to have more with Captain Vic and all of the amazing stories that he's willing to share with us and how he got into the Flagship DC-3 opportunity right after the break. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Now, we've been listening to the journey of Captain Vic Barber and how he ended up being an airline pilot, an airline captain. We've gotten up to the point where he's on the MD-80, he owns a ranch in Texas, and we're just discovering the amazing windy path, as he put, to get to this point in his career. A lot of us young aviators that have been around only for the past maybe decade or two really have not had to struggle that much, even though we say, the post 9/11 industry was tough to get a job. And really, to go from a flight instructor to a regional airline is not a very difficult road. It may seem that way, but when you listen to Vic's story about all of the different flight experiences and all the different places he's had to move and to live just to get that flight experience, to get that next step, to get that next job in order to make it. And it's inspiring. So the next time you're sitting next to a captain or a pilot that's been around for more than a few decades and they start to tell you a little bit about their journey in aviation, my gosh, my hat's off to you. It's tiring to hear it, to go, my God, what haven't you done? But you said you have quite a few ratings now, type ratings on a multitude of aircraft. Walk us through how you went from having a nice, stable, good quality of life, getting settled into Texas, getting settled into the sheep farm, and then going to the different type ratings. Was it just opportunity for upgrades that led you down this path?
Well, I'll get there. Let me just make a quick comment that, the guys that went from flight instructor to the commuters. Now, I had a unique, I'm blessed to have done it the way I did it because I'm just a simple farm boy from Idaho. And I need to learn things slow and easy. So I got all bits and pieces of that, of the aviation industry, a little bit at a time. And, it's like training a pup. You give them a little bit. Those fellows that go from flight instructing, they get the rating, and now all of a sudden they're a 250-hour flight instructor, and now they're out there with students, hammering on landings and and getting sharp at their game, and then going off, getting into a commuter where they're getting all kinds of new stuff hammered in. They didn't get eased into it like I did. It took me years to get to where they are. Just understanding SOP and crew concept was a new thing for me until halfway through my career, seems like, anyways. And so kudos to those guys because they took the fire hose. So
yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, and there is something to be said. I was one of those fire hose guys. So there's something to be said about the ability to keep up and retain it, and not just have some kind of rote multiple choice answer the questions, but to sit there and have all of the advanced avionics down packed, get in there and still impress at such a young age. It's a great opportunity right now in this industry.
Yeah. And I see the results of that sharpness when I've got guys in the right seat who've gone that path, and it amazes me. It's like, that guy's so much smarter than I am. What am I doing over here?
I think Rob and I had a conversation early on in our careers. I think we were both check airmen over at Sandpiper at the time, and we commented that we learn more from our, what we called students, but new hires that we were giving IOE to, than we had learned in a while. I mean, every once in a while you turn around and you're like, oh, I never thought about this, and I have all these hours behind me, and yet I'm learning from you. This is awesome. I think that opportunity to learn from the pilot next to you doesn't matter what seat, it's always there. And the young aviators that come up through the fire hose schoolhouse mentality, or the school farms, if you will, it's a lot you can learn from them. Yeah,
definitely.
So back to your time on the 80. How did that transfer over to another aircraft type?
Okay, so I flew the 80. I was an instructor on the 80 at the last job, and then I was in the right seat for quite a few years. And I was flying a trip with a captain that I had flown. I think it was our second month we had flown together. You used to do that. You'd fly with the guy for a whole month because you'd bid and you'd have the same
those days. Yeah,
same bid.
Line bidding.
Yep.
Yeah, and we were flying down to McAllen, and there were two DC-3s sitting down there. I said, "Oh, I'd love to fly that airplane." And he goes, "That guy sells type ratings, and it's about $10,000." And I'm going, "Yeah, that's the last thing." And that ain't going to happen for me. $10,000. I'm a new co-pilot. It was back when the pay was a little bit different. I had this big ranch that, in retrospect, it wasn't that big of a deal compared to a lot of guys with their houses. But, we had, I think my first son had come by then. And $10,000 to throw at a DC-3 type rating wasn't going to happen. So I upgraded. I moved to the right seat of the 737, and loved it. I always had that DC-3 thing in the back of my mind. And so I flew 7 years on the 737, and I had my bid in for 777 and 78. And I didn't expect to get either one, and I got the 777. It came way down low in seniority. I don't know if it's because I bid poorly, but nobody wanted to go to training in the summer or whenever time of year it was. But it came way down low to get me. And so, I have a 777 bid. And so I went to training for the 777. I got my type rating. I was out on the line 1 month, and I got my call that I had got the 78 bid. And I thought, well, how does that happen? I thought I was locked in for 2 years.
Yeah.
And turns out, the 777 was new equipment. So you get out of a lock-in for new equipment. So they said, okay, you need to consolidate. You need to get your 100 hours or, 100, 150. Anyway, you need to get your consolidation in the 777, and then we'll send you to 78 school. So I consolidated that next month, and then I went to Miami, got my training and my type rating in the 78, and then we didn't have any airplanes.
Oh,
so I had to go back to the 777 to requalify and finish out the year in the 777. And at least 10, maybe 11 of the months of the year that I was on the 777, I was the dead bottom guy in Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then finally I got over to the 78, and I flew it for 2 years. So that's 2 more type ratings. But when I upgraded the 777, I have done this thing over the years. When I get a type rating, I treat myself to something. When I didn't do it with the Citation because I was just lucky to have a paycheck. And but when I upgraded on the MD-80 at Mustang Air, I bought a Breitling watch. I'd wanted that watch since I was in college.
All right.
And so I celebrated and bought the Breitling titanium chronograph.
I remember you telling me this story when we were flying, Vic. This is great. Keep going.
Yeah. So then when I got my type rating on the, I don't remember if I did anything on the 737 because I was still a first officer, and I had a first officer type rating until right before the end. The last check ride I had on the 73, they were finally getting rid of all those second in command type ratings and giving everyone a full type rating. So I don't think I really celebrated for that. But for the 777, I decided I'm getting a DC-3 type rating. And that fellow down in McAllen wasn't there anymore. And I started searching around. And I think Dan Grider over in Atlanta, he was giving him type ratings. He second in command and PIC type ratings. I think his PIC was $16,000, I think. And was still looking, and somebody mentioned the Flagship Detroit. He said, why don't you give Zane Lemon a call? He's running the Flagship Detroit. And I said, yeah, I will. So I gave him a call. I said, hey, I want to get a DC-3 type rating. And Zane, if you haven't been here that long, Zane was a chief pilot. And I think he had retired at that point. Yeah, I think he had retired at that point, and he was doing just the flagship stuff. Well, he said, well, we don't really sell type ratings here. We need people to come over and help, and crew. And I said, oh, you mean you can get involved and you don't just get because I had fully intended to buy a type rating and maybe never get to fly the airplane ever again. Yeah. But I wanted it that bad. And I said, you can keep flying the airplane and be involved. And I said, yeah, that's what we need. All right, I'm in. So it started out. I ended up going up to Tulsa. Legacy has let us keep the airplane. The Flagship Detroit is a foundation, and it's made up of a good number of current and retired Legacy pilots, but there's also outside Legacy as well. That's just who started it. So I ended up on a work crew. We were a 500-hour check, and a lot of the mechanics, Legacy mechanics, volunteer, and Legacy lets us keep it. In Tulsa, we were keeping it in a big hangar up there, and Denton, or actually Alliance, early on. And anyway, so I started out my tenure with the Flagship Detroit at 100 degrees in the tail cone of the airplane with a wire brush scrubbing. Oh, and having the time of my life.
Oh man!
So we went up to we were up there, and this is my introduction to major airline maintenance, because I had never, I'd always gotten along real well with mechanics and hung out with mechanics at smaller operations, just out at the hangar. Well, at Legacy, it's a whole different ball game in the hangar. It's amazing. And so I remember going up, and I needed I was using this little plug-in vacuum cleaner because I was scrubbing stuff out of the inside of the tail cone back there and vacuuming it up. And I was asking about a tool. I needed, a tool, or I'm trying to remember what it was, some sort of a tool. And I was looking to, I was being a typical farmer. I was going, well, how can I fix this up so it works better for me? And I asked one of the mechanics, because a bunch of those mechanics come over on their breaks and work on the airplane, or their day off, they come and work on the airplane. It's a labor of love. And our maintenance director is a 737 maintenance guy, maintenance manager up there. So anyway, I go out and talk to one of the mechanics. He said, is there any way we can do this so I can, so it'll work better? And he goes, oh no, we got a tool for you. And we walked over to the tool room, and it's like a window in the wall. And hey, he needs a so-and-so. She went back and got me a tool specific to the job. And I was absolutely amazed. This is incredible. And went back, and I had the right tool. I didn't have to make do. And I became a regular visitor over at that window, because they would just give you stuff you needed to work on, the right tool for the job. And that's kind of a rare thing out on the ranch. I tell my wife, she teases me about buying tools. I say, yeah, I don't need it. She goes, what do you need that for? I said, I don't, but someday I'm gonna, and it's gonna save my bacon when I need it.
Yeah.
And sure enough, and that's the way it was there. They had the right tool, and if they didn't have the right tool, we had a prop. There's a big nut that holds, the prop on, right? And we didn't have a wrench for it. So the guys at the maintenance guys had one milled out of a solid stock of metal, and this is
fabricated
huge.
Huh?
They fabricated it, and it had to be, I don't know, a 3 or 4 foot wrench.
Wow!
And they had it, and they milled it. And not only that, because those guys love being involved with the flagship. So they not only made the tool for us, but they made a box for it. And there's a whole crating section up there, a department that does crates for shipping engines, shipping parts, and those guys
and all that.
So those guys normally they just put a crate together. They don't get to do the real nice work. They just throw a crate together that's a good strong crate that'll be great for shipping. And it's sort of like my dad always told me, if you want a good paint job, go to Earl Scheib. I said, really? It's a $200 paint job. No. You walk in and tell them you want a good paint job. And those guys don't get to do the real nice work because they always have to do the cheap jobs. But when you give them a good job, they do a great job at it because they don't get to do it very often. Well, That's the same way with they made a big box for this wrench, and it's out of wood. When I saw it, I thought it was metal because it was so well done. And they did this box and it was sanded up and just beautiful. And they did this beautiful, deep, lustrous paint job. I thought it was a metal box.
Wow.
And they lined it with felt, and so the tool fit in perfectly to it. And they put the Flagship Detroit on the top of it. It was
wow.
It was amazing. Those guys, it's a labor of love. It's what they do, and they don't. They want to contribute.
Yeah, that's cool.
So the way the training works is, you become a member. You can become members at different levels, and so you go to an air show, and they're looking for members. General membership for the Flagship Detroit Foundation. And that costs $100. Well, it just so happens that we're doing rides that day. You get to the front of the line on the ride because you can ride the airplane. If you're a member, if it's going somewhere and it's not a training mission, you can get on the airplane and go.
Oh, wow.
It might not be coming back to where it started. So it doesn't. So if you don't have jump seat, options or non-rev options, it might not be the best deal for you. But if you want to ride someplace on a DC-3 and you don't care how you get back, then jump on. You can go as long as there's room. And it's again not a training mission that we're.
Wow.
But we do a lot of the training. In consequence with other things. We're going to this air show. We're going to this fly. We're going to work with Vic on this one. Put him in the left seat, and we're going to get, do some stuff along the way, or because it costs a lot of money to run the airplane. So that level, the $100 membership, gets you in the airplane, and that day you get to the front of the line, and so and now for flying, it's a little bit different, and it was a little bit cheaper than buying a type rating from Dan Glider down in Atlanta. But the thing was, I was with a bunch of guys that they got to know me and I got to know them, and everyone has a common interest and goal, taking care of the flagship. Everybody loves her, and so then you'll get some you get some individual training. You got to go out and do some stuff that you can't really do in consequence with deadheads or that sort of thing. And I remember my first training flight going out. We taxied out at Denton, and there were people lined up on the taxiway to look at her go out. There were people making comments on the radio. And I kept looking back in the back of the airplane to see if John Paul, George, and Ringo were back there, because it was amazing.
Superstar.
She's a rock star.
Yeah.
Everywhere she goes, everybody recognizes the DC-3, and they want to get close to it. I mean, it's like a single guy taking a puppy to a park.
All you single guys out there, take note.
There you go. Great analogy.
In the opening, we were talking about how classic this DC-3 airplane is. Whenever you think of an old time airplane, you think of a DC-3. We mentioned the Casablanca opening, and Vic, I think you were doing a little research in the show, and Rob was making sure that I corrected myself, because in the film Casablanca, it's actually a Lockheed Electra.
Lockheed Electra, model L10A.
Yeah. Not a
I think
DC-3.
it's Air France too. So Air France
makes sense.
Lockheed Electra.
Yeah. But still, you get that whole tail dragger.
Same era.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe a FT to DC-3 is probably before that, but still, they're all around the same time.
So, Vic, you actually got your type rating through the foundation. Is that how you ended up with it?
Yeah. As the ground training was phenomenal. The gentleman, Gene, that's a primary instructor, and he's slowing down a little bit, maybe getting to where he's maybe going to about retire, maybe from the whole deal.
Sure.
Hopefully not soon, because he is a wealth of information. He's a fine gentleman, and he's a great instructor. But he instructed in DC-3s for an outfit that was doing GI Bill stuff, and he's got over 10,000 hours of dual given in the DC-3.
Wow.
And, yeah, amazing character, great stories. Again, fine gentleman. You couldn't ask for better.
Now, the foundation itself, it is a nonprofit foundation. You can donate your time. You can donate finances. Where to find this is at flagshipdetroit.org. I'll put a link in the show notes for anyone who is interested in looking into it. From the website, you can donate. You can volunteer your time. You can schedule a ride. You can see what upcoming events are available to you as a spectator, or maybe if you want to get a ride from it. This DC-3, the actual Flagship Detroit, was manufactured early in 1937, and Legacy Airlines accepted delivery in Detroit on March 2nd, 1937, to be exact. The DC-3, the Flagship DC-3, this particular one, was the 21st of 84 DC-3s delivered to American Airlines and operated between 1936 and 1947. She was restored as a flying tribute to employees and is flown by retired Legacy Airline pilots who will appear in period uniforms. Flagship Detroit has the honor of being the oldest flying DC-3 in the world today.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Now, some of those numbers are subject to discussion.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is she's actually the 24th.
Oh, 24th.
And here's what happened. C.R. Smith.
Uh-huh.
Can I use the name?
Sure.
Yeah.
So
C.R. Smith went to Douglas. He wanted an airplane that was better than the DC-2. And Douglas really didn't want to fool with it at the time, but C.R. Smith kept after him. He wanted more capacity. He wanted bigger engines. He wanted bigger range. He wanted to be able to go from the major hubs, New York, Detroit, Chicago. He wanted to cover all that. So they finally got together and they spec'd out over the telephone. They spec'd out this airplane, and so Douglas went after it. And the original 20, the idea originally was to have an airplane with that was a sleeper, like sort of like a train. They have sleeping compartments. Well, the first 20 airplanes, and Legacy got the first 20 airplanes, the production run, and they were not the DC-3, they were the DST, daylight sleeper transport. I think that's what it stands for. Oh. And they had upper and lower bunks that folded out, so you could actually sleep en route. So Legacy got the first 20, and then I always get confused about who got the next 20. It was United or Delta or one of the other major carriers, and then the next group came back to Legacy, and so that was the fourth one of that bunch. Then the military got involved, and they said, hey, we want a piece of this action. This is a good airplane, but we want some things different. The DC-3 has Wright Cyclone 1820 engines, and the military wanted the Pratt & Whitney engine. It's a 2-row radial. They wanted a little more fuel capacity. They wanted beefier gear and a few other things. And so I think only less than 500 original DC-3s were built. Amongst the C-47, which was the military version, and variants across the world, because even the Russians and the Chinese got in on that game and copied the airplane. The variants, there's over 6,000.
Wow.
Of those airplanes were built. She was delivered actually in Phoenix for all of you cactus people. So a little piece of history there. And she got the name Detroit because that was a run that the Detroit run.
Okay.
This airplane, Eleanor Roosevelt's been on this airplane a number of times.
Wow.
She liked to sit in the aft right seat because that made her the last one to get on and the first one to get off. They didn't have Air Force One back then, and so that's been the Detroit's claim to fame on that.
Very cool.
Anyway,
So here's something I learned from you on a flight when we were actually, I think we were flying into Reno, and you might be interested in this, Tony. I think the readers will get a kick out of it. Was one of the profiles in every airplane we do. We call for the landing gear up after takeoff, and a lot of guys that I've flown with here at Legacy, they use a hand gesture, to signal to put the gear up. Now, Vic, I think you told me that hand gesture actually originates from the DC-3. Was that something we talked about?
It was. The airplane, the right engines are so loud. We use we of course use Bose noise canceling headsets, but it is so loud on takeoff that you can't even talk to ATC until you do the first power reduction. It is painfully loud. Now it's not so bad once you get that power back. For the first reduction, but so there were hand signals involved, and that putting your palm out flat and raising your hand up, that was a signal for gear up, and that stayed with the company until we were doing that until 8 or 10 years ago, and finally they gave it up. Nobody else in the industry was doing that. But if you see an old guy do that, it's hard. Old habits are hard to break, and it doesn't hurt anything.
I've been doing that my entire career. I had no idea why. Just like, it must mean gear up. This is the gear
Isn't
up.
that amazing? Yeah. So Vic, tell us what it's like to fly the DC-3. So you gave us a little insight with the hand signal, but let's go further. So what are some of the most memorable runs you've had with it?
Well, actually, my type rating ride. This goes back to a story when I was in high school. I lived in Atlanta with my dad for a while, and one of my buddies from school invited me to go water skiing up at Lake Lanier one day. And I'd never been water skiing. I grew up under, in Idaho under less than farm. I actually grew up in just a reservation town there. I didn't grow up on the farm. That's just the place I worked. So stuff like water skiing and snow skiing and all that was for rich people. Fishing, we all fished and hunted, but we didn't fly fish because that was for rich people. We just, we were fish killers. And so I went out to water skiing, and it turns out that this friend's dad was an Eastern Airlines captain. And we went out on the lake, and I had a blast. We skied all day long, and I was in heaven. I just thought that was the funnest, coolest thing. And I remember thinking, I want a piece of this action. I want to be an airline captain. That was the first thought I really ever had about, being an airline captain was back then. Well, so it just so happens that I'm in Toccoa, Georgia, getting my type rating because our instructor has a long history with the DPE that does DC-3 types. That was an Eastern guy. He was actually flying for Eastern Airlines when he was too young to have an ATP, and when the day he got his ATP, they made him a check airman because he had so much experience with the company.
Okay.
So anyways, we went and did the check ride. Well, we were doing the check ride at Toccoa. Now Toccoa is northeast of Lake Lanier, and I wasn't thinking anything about it. But we were up there and we were doing our ride. I was all concentrating on doing a good job on my type ride, and ATC called traffic for us, and the examiner and my instructor were looking and they couldn't see it. And so I came off of my foggles. I had foggles on because we were doing maneuvers, and I was looking around. We finally spotted the traffic, but we were in a turn, and I looked down and I said, "Is that Lake Lanier there?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "That's amazing," because arguably the pinnacle of my career is getting a DC-3 type rating. I've got the 7.6, the 777, the 7.8, the 7.3, all those type ratings. the one that mattered was the DC-3 because it just mattered. And it just felt like the biggest accomplishment. And I'm turning circles, looking down where that whole thing kind of started.
Yeah.
It was one of my Forrest Gump moments.
That's amazing.
So, but you asked how it is to fly. It's just amazing. And it's not, you feel like you're doing something. It's not like you're not doing a little bit here, a little bit there, like any tail dragger, she'll eat your lunch if you let her. And so you basically got to let her know what you want. You got to move that column. You got to move those ailerons. You got to move those rudders big time sometimes. And you just feel like you're doing something and you're making a bunch of noise and it's just awesome.
I'm
just sitting here thinking about it. Just
yeah, I mean, we were looking at you telling it.
I was going to say, if you're listening to the podcast right now, you can't see this, but the smile on Vic's face right now goes from one earphone all the way across his face to the other earphone.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's obviously amazing.
It is clear that it is a passion and a love affair that you have with that aircraft and the opportunity that you are so fortunate to have to be such a big part of it. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We wanted to ask you, with all your experience, I'm sure you have enough to give us for another 4 or 5 hours worth of topics, and maybe we'll just have to have you on again. But we like to ask a couple questions from your plethora of knowledge and wisdom. You've been flying now for quite some time. What has been the one probably scariest, or should I say the most stressful scenario you've had in flight?
Flying with Rob. No, go ahead.
That is pretty scary.
The whole time I'm flying with him, what else is he going to figure out that I'm not doing right?
No, sorry, go ahead.
That comes up from time to time. And I remember the first time I lost an engine in my J3 Cup. Back when I was younger, I had 100 some odd hours of flight time, and my instructor, the one that recommended me for the job, my first job, we were out over the desert and we were doing simulated engine failures, and he pulled the power back, and I went through the procedure and told him what I was going to do, and he didn't respond. So I'm waiting and no response. I'm getting closer to the land, to the ground, and I'm lined up on a kind of a trail that's out there in the desert, a little, truck trail. And he turned around and grinned at me. You better land it. And so we actually followed through and landed. And then we turned around and took off. And so in that airplane, a few months later, my engine did fail, and it was a fuel issue. I had recently gone to autogas, and apparently that had destroyed the gasket that was in my gascolator, and it had clogged up the carburetor. And I landed out there in the desert, and it really wasn't a terribly big thing, because there was a strip out there where I was and landed. And I think back about all those things that have happened, in the past, and it depends on preparation. When you're prepared, the next time I had an engine failure, I had a Starduster 1, and I was in the pattern and it failed, and I was upset because it failed. I wasn't, and I just did a dead stick landing on the runway. It was no big deal. And probably, we had a pressurization issue coming out of Denver once, and that was probably the worst one that I ever had, because I really wasn't prepared for that in my mind. One of the great things as an instructor you can tell students is never go anywhere your brain hasn't gone already, and my brain hadn't gone there. And we talk about Sully, Sully, with his situation, our brains have all been there now because he did that.
Yeah.
And so I can't think of a specific moment. I was actually had a fire once, and it's one of the funniest things ever when I tell the story, because I was in a Navajo, and we took off out of Grand Junction, and we were heading back over to Denver, and we'd just taken off. We were climbing out, and all of a sudden, a big bright light on the right hand side, and I was transporting one of the other pilots that lived out there. They were sending him to Montana or something, and he needed to come to Denver, and he was sitting over. He was an old cowboy dude, and big bright light on the right hand side, and I'm going. I looked over and said, "Are we on fire?" And he goes, "Yep." and I said, "I guess we ought to go back, huh?" And he goes, "Yep." So I feathered the engine. We turned around, went back, and landed. It wasn't that. What happened was the oil cap. There was the oil cap on that engine. It had a flip top thing that then the gasket had worn out, and so it slipped loose and was spilling oil back on the turbocharger. As soon as I pulled the engine back, it stopped because the turbocharger cooled down.
Yeah,
and so we went back and had the mechanic fix it, and we pressed on our way. But it's fire. Everybody say, "You had a fire? You lived?" Good. Yeah, got a good story out of it too.
You got to say it just like you did. Yep.
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 So engine failures, engine fires, pressurization issues, that stuff's going to happen. They're machines. And I learned that on the farm. A machine will break. They're machines. They break. And things are going to break on airplanes. But the beauty about airplanes is we have redundancy built in, and we have procedure. And then we have a pilot. So,
two pilots.
Yeah, the 7 Ps, you said something that reminded me of the 7 Ps. It's an old military adage from, I think, actually Great Britain. Proper planning and preparedness prevents piss-poor performance.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like you said, we all know now that it could happen. You can ditch an aircraft in the Hudson and everyone can live. A couple of shows ago, we talked about Pan Am Flight 6. You could actually ditch an airliner in the ocean in the 50s and everyone can survive. Captain Richard Ogg showed us that it can be done. And so we hear about these stories, and the pilots that I've met over the years that are intrigued by accident reports. At first, I used to think, why are you focusing on such negativity? Why just, fly the airplane, learn about the major ones, but why are you so enamored with air disaster? Why are you watching these shows? And I came to realize relatively quickly that what you learn from these experiences are both what not to do and how to react in the event that they happen to you. And that's why they say there are old pilots and bold pilots, but not old, bold pilots.
Bold, yeah.
But the truth is, with experience comes a knowledge. And when you share that knowledge, everyone around you in the community can learn from it. And, you've shared so much knowledge with us. It's an amazing story to hear. And you're so calm with, engine's fire. Yeah, I guess you'll go back.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess so. Lost an engine in my Cub. I guess I'll just put it down here in the field. I did it a couple weeks ago. What's the big deal, right? I mean, that's really what people expect when they hear airline pilot, or even pilot in general, GA pilot as well.
Yeah.
They expect this Clint Eastwood stare, and just like dirty.
Yeah, I can't stare without smiling though.
So in all your experience, have you had to deal with some major conflicting personalities on the flight deck? How did you handle them?
Oh, you know what? That's a great question, because I just did an interview in the training department, and they asked a question kind of like that, and I gave an answer that I thought was applicable, and then I thought about it later on. I always have the perfect answer way too late. I should have said, well, have you ever had any conflicts you had to deal with? And the answer should have been, does that include my wife? And How did I handle it? How did I handle it? Well, the answer is, I'm sorry. You're right. And I was absolutely wrong. And you look marvelous in that outfit.
How would that work with your FO, though? You look marvelous in that outfit.
Yeah.
I got to say that I feel so absolutely blessed. At Legacy Airlines, probably I've flown with one captain that I wouldn't want to fly with again. And I have a son who is high functioning autistic, and that's basically a communications disconnect. And he I get it. But I flew with this fellow for a trip, and I kept finding myself thinking, did he just say that to a 40-something-year-old grown man? And does he not? And he was new to the airplane, and I had a considerable amount of time on it, and I just kept getting these. It was treating me like a new hire. That ended up being kind of a bad ending for me, because I finally just got to the point where he was telling me to do something that was wrong, and I pointed out to him in a kind of an abrupt way, and I said, "No, you can't do that because this and this," and he backed off. And it was, I felt like I had failed, because my job is to support him and make his job easier. And I had lost my temper, really. But then he backed off and left me alone. And I was able to do my job better. And that's kind of like old school, back in the old days where you slug the bully in the gut and he leaves you alone, kind of a deal. But it shouldn't work that way in a crew environment. And I felt like I had failed. And so that was one person, that the only person I ever put on a no-fly, on my no-fly, no pairing list.
Yeah.
And again, so that's a conflict that I failed at, I think. But after it was over, it dawned on me. And the fact that he actually backed off on that and the way he did it, I felt, this guy's on the spectrum. If you're not familiar with autism, it's a spectrum. You got the high functioning end, and you got all the way down to no ability to communicate with people. And this guy's on the spectrum. And it helped a little bit, but I still felt like I had failed on that. And we learned from our failures. But at Legacy Airlines, I'm so blessed, because I've flown with guys that, this is a tedious flight, but never someone that I didn't feel I could fly with again.
Yeah.
And now, back in my previous jobs, I flew with some incredible characters. And that's the best way to say it, characters, because it's a little bit different world, when you're out there flying freight at night, everybody's tired, and different backgrounds, and there's and some guys that aren't looking for that way up, and quite frankly, probably aren't going to make it there. Yeah. And so your conflict resolution may be a little bit different, but again, sometimes you have to speak up and say, there was one fellow that I flew with that in the Citation that he was terrible with controllers. And we were flying somewhere near 3 Mile Island on our way up to the Northeast. And I knew this guy. He came from a pretty rough background, and not a very genteel kind of a person. And but we went up and we got a vector, and something happened. They vectored us and slowed us down. We didn't understand, because we're kind of in the middle of nowhere. But New York has its, they've got the big picture and we don't. And he laid into that controller, and I was just over there in the right seat cringing. I was so embarrassed, and so we press on, and we go into Hartford or wherever we were headed, and we land, and we come back out, and we're headed back to Cincinnati, and we in that same spot, and out of the blue, we got a 360-degree turn, and he grabbed the mic and started to go, and I stopped, and I said, stop right there. You have this coming and you know it. and he looked at me and he grinned. He goes, "You're right."
Yeah, always treat your controllers with the utmost respect, because at the end of the day, it's like they'll wave you off the arrival and they'll say, prepare for holding. Like, wait, what? Yeah. But yeah, no, I asked that question because I always find it interesting the way people respond. And it seems like sometimes you'll get a co-pilot or a captain that you fly with that you don't know the struggles they may have in their life. You really don't know the battles that they're fighting, maybe that day or that year or that month or whatever it is. And they get in the flight deck and immediately you could have scenarios, and they're very rare, but you could have scenarios where the barriers of communication have gone up. The interpersonal skills may not be there that day. And you, as an individual and a professional, will tell yourself what they call a micro story in that moment. And you say, well, what's wrong with this guy? Why are they being so stuck up? Or maybe, why did he bark at me? I'm not his, slave. I'm not sitting here. I need respect, So next thing you know, you have these personality conflicts on the flight deck. Now, the first example you gave, you pushed back a little bit and the guy backed off. And in my experience, I've seen this many times, and it's usually a particular personality type where they want to know that the person next to them is on par with them, and they're going to stand up and just be one of those types that are going to stand up and get what they need. So you push back a little bit and then they back off, and then they got respect for you. If you sit there and kind of go, well, you're being mean, you're a jerk, and next thing you know, it's very uncomfortable for the rest of the trip. Other personality types is just like you said, especially the commuters or maybe the cargo operators or the jump operations or whatever you're doing, you come across people that they don't have that end goal in sight, at least not right away. So they're like, oh, this is my job and I'm doing it, and, just get out of my way. And that becomes a conflict, and it's very uncomfortable. I think what we are getting at here is, at the end of the day, when you're looking at the person next to you and trying to figure them out, have a little bit of compassion, I think, is the common thread. And try to, like, you saw that as a failure. You said you saw it as a failure when you push back a little bit, and you snap back at this pilot that was being kind of rough around the edges. But I think that worked. That worked in that scenario. A lot of young pilots ask these questions, and I think it's something that just comes in time to learn how to deal with it. You've given some great examples of sometimes people, maybe like you mentioned, the one captain, maybe he's on the spectrum. You would know, you have experience. And once you have that understanding, I think that's when you become compassionate to the fact that, okay, I'm going to now adjust how I operate. And next thing you know, everything's smooth as butter. You're just you get along, you do your trip, and then it's the end of that sequence. It's like, okay, have a nice life. See you again. Maybe never. It's tough. I went on a rant there.
No, that was a good one, because there's, I learn a lot. I've learned a lot from guys that I've flown with. And there's some guys that, and everybody I fly with, there's guys that fly the airplane. It'd make your eyes water how good they fly the airplane. There's guys that know SOP, or they know regs, and then there's guys that are really good with people and situations. And then there's the guys that aren't, and you wonder, you flown with that guy that can honk off a flight attendant with a single look, and it's like, how do you do that? And why would you do that, for starting?
Make it harder yourself.
but you learn from all those people and those specific skills that they have. And again, a huge blessing that I've been exposed to so many of those guys. Now, the as far as the conflict between, in the cockpit, the only guy you get to experience that with is the guy on the other side of the seat. And maybe you catch him doing something that disarms you, maybe. And oh, wow, he just handled me well. My wife does that all the time. She, I start to get worked up about something and she calms me down. And it's like, I recognize that when she does it, but maybe, so we don't get as much of that secondhand experience when we're in the cockpit. We get secondhand experience with them dealing with flight attendants, maybe, or ground personnel, or gate agents, and some of them are just marvelous at it. So, and just being steady. That seems to be the, take a breath before you say anything, and be steady and think about it for a second.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's sage advice. I try to follow that as much as I possibly can too, and not just at work. Take a breath, think about it. Now, as we were kind of wrapping up the show here, we've had you on, and we do appreciate you spending the time with us and giving us
a pleasure.
This insight. We always like to finish up with our guests with a couple questions that make them ponder a little bit about moments in their career. If you had to go back in time just for a moment and whisper in your younger self's ear, what would you tell yourself?
Whatever you do not neglect your family.
Well said.
Wonderful.
Wow.
We are focused, hard focused, because, we perceive, and it's true that you need to have hard focus. People ask me, what does it take to be an airline pilot? Well, clearly not a lot of intelligence. But what you have to have is a lot of wanna. You got to want to do it. You really got to want to, and that, the drive to follow through with that. But with a lot of things, it's easy to go over the top with that. And if you have, like I had younger in my career, if you had, you were lacking self-esteem, everybody said that you couldn't do it, you can't do this, and you're out to prove that you can do this. You tend to be a hard charger or a hard driver and let nothing get in your way. Just plow through the obstacles. But the fact of the matter is that it is a world of people, and family are the most important ones. And if you have to, and it's going to cost you a little bit in your progress, maybe sometimes, but it's going to help you in your progress at other times. Yeah, you have to consider your family first. And I didn't really have a chance to consider my family until much later in my career. And it probably why it took me so long to have a family, because nothing else mattered. And it's a lonely world out there when you're sitting in a hotel in Riverton, Wyoming at 20 degrees below zero, and you can't pick up you don't have anybody to talk to, or you don't even have to look forward to coming home that night at the end of the trip to someone who loves you and respects you and takes care of you.
Nice.
Very well said.
Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank you for coming along with us on this journey. I'd like to say a big special thank you to Captain Vic Barber for spending the day with us here and talking about his journey in aviation and his involvement with Flagship Detroit. As we mentioned earlier, anyone interested in learning more about Flagship Detroit, you can go to their website at flagshipdetroit.org. Again, we'll have a link in the show notes. We'd also like to say a big thank you for all of you listening in today. Please be sure to subscribe and follow the Squawk Ident podcast wherever you're listening. We also love listener feedback. You can send us audio feedback and comments via our website at aviatortony.com. That's Alpha Victor, the number 8, Romeo Tango Oscar November Yankee.com. There you can also find audio archives, photos from the flight line, our Squawk Ident pilot shop, and guest book photos as well. You can contribute to the show financially right there from the homepage. Also, if you're on social media, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram users can find us under the Squawk Ident podcast. A big final thank you to Rob D. and Captain Vic Barber for joining me today, and a big thank you to you for taking the time to listen to these grateful aviators. Keep the dirty side down out there, and be safe, and take care of each other. Bye, y'all.
See ya.
See ya.